To this day, I'm not entirely sure if this incident was a dream or real. It felt real, but the mere possibility of it was fantastical. Maybe my mind can't wrap itself around the idea that this actually happened, but my memory of it is so detailed, even to this day, that I can't say it was a dream either. My story took place in Brooklyn, New York, when I was 14 years old. I just started high school, and I was feeling more independent. I was finally able to get my own bedroom after my grandma moved out into a separate apartment from my family. Up to this point, I shared a bedroom with my younger sister. She's 3 years younger than me, and we've always got along fine when we were kids. But when I became a teenager, I felt the need to be more independent, to at least have my own room. And our parents agreed. When my room was finally all set up, it was awesome. I had my own bed and my own TV with video games. I could technically do whatever I wanted within the minimum interference from my folks. This room was a mini paradise and could not get better. Until it was time for bed. The drawback of being alone was being alone at night. When I turned off the lights, the room became pitch black. There was no moon for minimal light, and where my room was positioned, it was away from the street lights. So, there was absolutely darkness. I was not used to this. When I was with my sister, there was some form of a light coming in when it was time for bed, and now that I'm utterly alone, I felt like my senses were heightened. I could hear every little creak of the house, every little squeak of a mouse, and sometimes I felt like there was something else. A sense that I was not alone. The first few nights were tough, as I couldn't fall asleep quickly. I would usually fall asleep when it was really late, and I literally passed out from tiredness. I couldn't leave the TV on, since the glare of the light was too bright, and I felt like I would get in trouble if my parents found it on in the middle of the night. So, I decided to swallow my pride and get a night light. It wasn't too bright, just enough that I could see what was in my room. This small addition considerably boosted my confidence, and I was able to sleep much better. Things were great for the first few months, as I grew accustomed to being alone at night, and soon I didn't need the nightlight anymore. Finally, after a while, I began sleeping in the darkness, and it wasn't so bad. Things were normal, until one night, I woke up to something that sounded sort of like thunder, but more like a loud rush of air. I opened my eyes, and I looked around the room. When I looked at the window, there was a bright light, shining in almost blinding. I couldn't wrap my head around what was happening to the point that I literally asked myself, am I dreaming? Then, a voice just growled in my head, no, you're not. The bright light went away, and I looked around frantically for what the hell could have made that freaking voice? Typically, if that would happen, I would have hidden under my sheets. But this time was different. I was more perplexed and curious than scared. I walked out of my room and looked down the hall, and I noticed my sister's bedroom door slightly open. I peeked in, and a cold shudder went down my back. The unbelievable was happening as I looked at my worst nightmare coming true. My sister was asleep, but there was a dark being kneeling next to her bed. He was on the other side of the bed, so I couldn't see the rest of his body. But what I saw wasn't human. I saw a demonic-looking face peering at me from the other side of the bed. His skin was bluish gray, and his face was harsh as black creases showed every wrinkle and definition of his face. It had jet black hair that was like a full lion's mane. It was so predominant that I didn't notice any other shoulders or anything below its head, although I could tell there was a body there. But the main thing I noticed, what really caught my attention, was its bright yellow eyes. They glowed as if it generated its own light. It was not reflecting any light from an outside source, and in the corner of the yellow orbs were just little black pupils. It stared me down at first. I couldn't move as I stared back. It felt like a good minute passed by before I noticed it move a little. Was it going to charge at me? Was it going to hurt my sister? I walked towards it, my main concern growing for my sister. And I walked towards it, slowly but deliberately. I wasn't sure if I could do anything to hurt it, and I wasn't even thinking of the repercussions. But I was not going to back down. When I closed halfway, I noticed it shifted slightly again, and then it began to meld into the darkness of the night. Within seconds, it was gone. Where did it go? I thought to myself. Was it real? How could something like that actually exist? Or was my mind playing tricks on me from lack of sleep? But I was awake, and I was aware of everything that was happening. So I looked around her bed and checked out all the corners and possible hiding spots, taking care not to wake her. After a few good minutes of searching, I was sure it was gone, or maybe never there in the first place. I thought about staying in the room with her for the rest of the night, but then I felt that whatever this thing was, if it was going to come back, there wasn't much that I could do. But my gut feeling grew that she was safe. When I was returning to my room, I thought to myself, what was that voice? Was it the creature that was stalking my sister, or was it something else, alerting me to the danger in the next room? As I settled back in my bed, I couldn't fall back asleep. I was still trying to comprehend what had just happened. Was that thing going to come back? Was it going to come for me next? I put my nightlight back on, the only piece of security I had left, and eventually fell back asleep. I never told my sister of the incident because I didn't want to scare her. That thing never came back, although my sister seemed to develop a spiritual sensitivity to her surroundings, and sometimes I've heard her mention things like seeing things out of the corner of her eyes and sensing things that you can't normally see. Now that I'm an adult, I have 2 toddlers of my own and I love them dearly, and would do anything to protect. I've never told my wife about the incident with that thing when I was a teenager. It's not from fear that she wouldn't believe me, but more she does. I doubt she would ever get a good night's sleep again. So, I have kept my little secret to myself. But now whenever I wake up in the middle of the night, I don't fall back asleep without checking in on my sleeping children. I have to make sure there's nothing evil lurking in their rooms at night. My dad has always been that type of guy where he doesn't believe in anything unless he's witnessed it for himself. He's a pretty macho guy and isn't into all that fairy tale and ghost nonsense. Yet, that all changed for him one day. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon when my dad came home. He works the night shift at the old Reno prison. He says it's a pretty laid-back job for the most part. He will usually drive around the prison in one of the guard trucks or keeps in the watchtower. But one night, he was sent to do a sweep of the chapel, as to make sure no one was in there who wasn't supposed to be. His boss, let's call him Jack, told him to come back and check in with him after he had done so. My dad walked through the yard out to the chapel, and as soon as he walked in, he said he felt a wave of nervousness come over him. He flicked on the old lights and walked in and began to check all around the room. After a couple of minutes, he said a man, dressed in the same uniform as him, walked out from a little office in the back. My dad asked if the man was here already doing the sweep of the chapel, and the man replied, "Yes, I'll take it from here." So confused as to why he was sent over to check the chapel in the first place, my dad just gave a little, "Oh, okay, I'll let Jack know." My dad returned to his boss about 15 minutes after he had sent him. Jack looked at him and asked, "How did you get done so fast? You couldn't have possibly checked the whole place in that short amount of time." "Another guard's already in there. He said he'll check it out," my dad said, and I guess Jack didn't think anything of it. As long as the chapel was checked, everything was fine with him. Well, This is where it gets creepy. About 3 days after, my dad said he was walking down the halls of the prison and stopped to look at the display case of old photos of other guards in the past. He was browsing the photos. He said his heart sank and his blood froze. One of the pictures he came across was that very same guard he had encountered in the chapel. Only this guard was dead. Apparently, about 4 years before my dad started working there, a riot had broken out in the chapel and a guard was stabbed to death, and that guard was the same man my dad had seen in the old chapel. But out of the 12 years of working there, not once had he ever heard about the riot until now. I don't know if they just don't talk about it, or they're scared it might run off some newbies, or if it's just something that a lot of them forgot about. All I can say is, my dad is now a firm believer in the paranormal, and not once has he ever gone back in that creepy chapel. I've been listening to your channel for a few months now, and I love it. It's been a huge help in reigniting my passion for the stories about the things that go bump in the night, the unexplainable, and the things lurking in the dark. I decided to share one of my stories about a suspecting haunting in a case that fits with your upcoming collections. I've changed the names for privacy. One of the most terrifying incidents that still gives me chills to this day happened when I was maybe 12 or 13 years old. My parents were separated at the time, and my mom was working second shift at a nearby plastics factory. My mom had someone else babysitting my little brothers, and I didn't want to be alone in the house, so my friend, I'll call her Sarah, would stay with me sometimes. I didn't know how to cook, for I loved baking and making my mom cakes or muffins, so she had something warm and welcoming when she had come home from work. Anyway, so Sarah and I were upstairs in my 2-level house, baking another cake for my mom. It's dark outside, maybe around 7:30 at night, and there's a lull in our preteen nonsense, and that's when we hear whispering. We hear the voices of a man and a woman coming from the basement, and it sounds like they're arguing. Sarah and I distinctively freeze, and instinctively, I looked at her with wide-eyed terror. It was one of those moments where your stomach drops and you feel sick as the adrenaline begins to seep through your veins. For a few moments we just listened, until suddenly, the voices stopped. Within a matter of seconds, we heard a boot at the bottom of the stairs where they start in the basement. We both bolted for the bathroom, grabbing a broom and a mop as we went, and locked ourselves inside. One by one, we heard thick, heavy thuds, as it very clearly sounded like someone was coming up the stairs. We heard the shuffle of steps on the first landing, where the front door is, and then the turn as they begin to climb the set of stairs on the main level. At this point, we were in tears and trying to be as quiet as possible, hoping that whoever is in the house won't be able to get into the bedroom. We hear the footsteps come through the hallway and go right into the door. Then, there's nothing but an occasional squeaking of floorboards, as if someone were shifting their weight from side to side. Curious as to what the heck is going on, I look under the crack of the doorway, praying that this intruder is gone. We had hardwood floors throughout the house, so there was a decent gap at the bottom of the door, and you could see just a bit of the floor in the hallway. With my face pressed against the bathroom floor, I peeked out. I could see 2 shadows, like the shadows of booted feet. There was a light in one of the halls that would have given that effect to anyone standing there. I stood again, and back to the far side of the bathroom with my friend, panicking, sure that some intruder was going to break in and do horrible things before killing us. For several moments, nothing happened. We stood there, hearts pounding, welding broom and mop, ready to make some attempt at defending ourselves if we had to. Then, we heard the front door open and close. More footsteps made their way up the top of the landing. Then, there's a slight pause. "Anna?" My mother called out for me. Sarah and I burst out of the bathroom crying and hysterically trying to tell my mom what happened. My mom searched the house and searched outside, but there was no sign that anyone was there or anyone had been there. My mom was worried that maybe there had been an intruder, but there was no explanation and not a single clue to support that conclusion. The back door in the basement couldn't have been opened due to it being waterlogged, and most of the windows in the basement had the same problem. Regardless, all of them were still locked when checked. We never heard any footsteps leave after I saw the shadows in front of the bathroom door, and there wasn't any silent way out of the house. There was no opening or closing of any doors. We had a regular exterior door that led to the deck, but it also had no problems, so it was incredibly hard and noisy to open and shut. Nothing was out of place, and we could never explain what happened that night. Sarah, understandably, didn't want to stay with me alone in the house anymore, and I couldn't blame her. Too bad I was stuck there. But the story doesn't end there. Around 17 years later, my niece, who lived for a long time with my dad and stepmom in the same house, was home alone after some school. My dad and stepmom often worked late into the night, as my dad owned his own business. She was a little older than I was when my incident happened, but she didn't have a friend with her. In a break between episodes of whatever show she was watching, she heard the whispering in the basement. 2 voices, a man and a woman, arguing. Then, the footsteps coming from the basement. She also ran and locked herself in the bathroom, emerging hysterical once my dad and stepmom came home and called out for her. She never stayed alone in the house again. Here's the thing, she had never heard my story, as for a long time, I never talked about it. I especially wouldn't tell my story to little kids who had to live there. I never told my dad or stepmom about it either. And I never told my stepsister, my niece's mother, this story either. Of course, the concern was again that there was an intruder, but it was the same situation. The footsteps never left. She thought someone was in the front of the door until she heard my stepmom and dad come in and call for her. To this day, there is still no explanation for what happened. Now, my dad rents the house out, and I'm glad I don't ever have to go back there. But it was by far the most aggressive, terrifying, and physically real than any other strange occurrence in that house. Has anyone else ever experienced anything similar to this? I'm a 16-year-old male, and I used to be a bit of a skeptic to all things paranormal, until one weekend at an abandoned house. To give some backstory, I was with my 2 best friends at the time, Delaney and Julia. We were home alone and bored at Delaney's house with nothing to do. I can't remember whose idea it was, but one of us had the idea to drive around some of the old dirt roads and check out abandoned buildings. There were a lot of abandoned places around where we live. It's pretty far out in the country, surrounded by either farms or woods. So we went to the first 2 old tobacco houses, took a few pictures, and just sort of goofed off. We got back on the road and saw an old, unkept driveway. Keep in mind, hardly anyone lives on this road, so we decided to drive down the driveway, despite Julia saying we shouldn't because it doesn't feel right to her. Not the fact that it'd be trespassing, just that she had extremely bad vibes about the place. However, Delaney and I insisted. We drove down it, and we went pretty far back into the woods. This is where things started to happen. We parked the truck in a little clearing and noticed an abandoned house in the distance. However, before we got out of the truck, The front sensor went off beeping like crazy. Then, so did the back one. It was as if someone had walked around the truck. The weird thing is, though, is we were parked in a clearing, so there was nothing to make the sensors go off. Even if there were, they would have gone off before we even parked the truck, and we wouldn't have just randomly gone off in that order. Delaney and Julia were kind of freaked out, but I just ignored it. It wasn't until later that this would freak me out too. We all got out of the truck and started walking towards the house. I was in front with my friends, walking a decent distance behind me. If I'm honest, I was just showing off and acting fearless. I wasn't scared until I saw her. A woman with dingy, unkempt-looking hair in a colonial-style dress, looking around the corner of the house. She looked at me and put her finger up to her lips and shushed me very loudly. The feeling I had is almost indescribable. Imagine feeling as if any and all sense of safety and protection is gone. You don't feel at all happy. My heart felt like it stopped. I started crying. I was so scared and knew she wasn't human. I don't know how. He just knew. I turned around to my friends and screamed, "Run," and started sprinting back to the truck. My phone flew out of my pocket and halfway back to the truck. My friend Julia told me this had happened and I told her to leave it. Now, if you know me, you'd know if I'm ditching my phone, I'm serious. Julia and Delaney got back to the truck, and we tried to open it, but it was locked. Delaney reached for her keys, but they were gone, and so was Julia's phone. It was like whatever was chasing us just somehow took all of our stuff. It's like whatever that thing was wanted to keep us there. Delaney ran back and picked up Julia and my phone and found her keys. We got in the truck and floored it out of there, back to Delaney's house. You might think it's just a coincidental we all dropped our things or something like that. The thing is, our phones and Delaney's keys were all in our pockets, and it didn't make sense for them just to fall out on their own. Later at the house, we were all talking about the entire situation. Now I was explaining what I had seen. My friends didn't even hear the shush, nor did they see the woman. I was afraid they didn't believe me, but Julia reassured me with the look on my face and tears that were proof enough for me to run as well. We later found out that there have been a few sightings of ghosts on that road by workers at Fort Pickett, a military facility nearby. To start off, my name is Taylor. I am 20 years old and my fiance is 21. I have been with my fiance Austin for 3 years on Christmas. We dated for maybe 2 months before moving in together, as I was still 17 and in high school. A month before the end of my senior year, he moved in with my parents and I because of falling out with his brother. And then about 4 days before my graduation, we got our first house. It was not amazing or beautiful by any means, but it was ours. It wasn't in the best neighborhood, and it was cheap. The roof was really old, the basement leaked, all the windows were busted out, and the siding along the driveway was spray painted. But we slowly repaired it and made it much more livable. About 6 months into living there, weird things started to happen around the house. I thought it was just the house settling, or I was just getting spooked because I was in a new place. Some mornings, my clothes that I had laid out on the dresser were in a pile on the floor or thrown around the room. When I would be home alone, I would hear the floorboards in the hall creak like someone was walking on them. Multiple times, I would catch something out of the corner of my eye, and then I would turn around, but it would be gone. I never said anything to my fiancé about it, because I thought he would tell me that it's nothing, until one day I saw him staring at a dark bedroom from the middle of the hall, and I called to him. He jumped and looked at me with fear in his eyes. Where'd you come from?" he asked, his voice shaking a bit. "I just came inside from the back porch. Why?" I responded, looking at him questioningly. I just saw you standing in the dark in the bedroom. When I asked what you were doing, you just stood there and didn't acknowledge me. Then, when I heard the back door shut, I looked that way. When I looked back, you were just gone. Glancing from me to the darkened room. Babe, I swear I was outside. Plus, you know I'm afraid of the dark. I wouldn't just stand in it for no reason. I inched closer to him and hugged him as I said that. Where the next horrifying incident happened, that was a week before Christmas. I'm a very festive person, so there was always some sort of light on in the house, whether it be from outside the house or from the tree, or the lights I had put down the hallway to illuminate the path to the bedroom. This night in particular, I was super exhausted. I had just gotten home from work and I was settling in on the couch to watch some creepy videos on YouTube, but ended up passing out a few minutes in. I suddenly woke up to a deep silence. I always had some sort of fan or white noise to relax myself, but it was quiet, in pitch black in my house. I tried to use my phone to illuminate the area, but as I pressed the home button, it showed it was dead. Great, I thought, realizing the situation I was in. All of my clocks were digital, so I didn't even know what time it was. I was too scared to move. It was too dark. Dark enough for something to hide right next to you and you'd never know it. I stayed still, breathing slowly and trying to listen to any sounds around me. After a few minutes, I started to hear the creak of the basement stairs. Crap, should I lock the basement door when I go home? I didn't wait to find out and I bolted for my bedroom, slamming it and locking the door as I heard the basement door slam open and walking to the hallway. The way my house is set up, if you come through the back door, you can either go down a flight of stairs to the basement or you have to go 3 steps to go to the doorway through the kitchen. From the kitchen, you can either keep going straight through the dining area into the living room, or you can turn and head to the hallway. At the hallway, the bathroom is in the right end to the center, and either ends of the hall are 2 bedrooms. I pressed my body against the door and sunk down, gripping my dead phone to my chest and trying to control my breathing. Whatever it was went to the other bedroom first, scratching on the door, and then slowly turning to bangs. When it got no response, it crept to my door. The door I had my back against. I knew it was too late to hide or move, so I planted my feet on the floor and gripped the carpet tightly, bracing for whatever was to come. I felt the door try to give as whatever it was pressed itself against the door, listening. I clapped a hand over my mouth and a muffled cry came out as a huge bang came against the door. It scratched and it beat against the door. I could hear something in my mind telling me that if I let this thing in here, my fiancé and family would never find my body. I kept myself pressed against the door for what felt like hours. Slowly, it walked away, creeping back to the basement, and I saw the glow of the hallway lights beneath my door. I looked down at my phone, and the bright Apple screen came up, powering it back on. So many messages and missed calls from my fiancé, wondering why my phone was off and what was going on. It was only 1 a.m. He was still at work closing up. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and stood up, carefully opening the door. I was horrified to find that there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Like everything had just gone on was in my mind and not in real life. I grabbed my vape, my phone, and a knife from my purse, and sat outside in the cold till Austin came home. I told him and he did not believe me. I was terrified to be in the house alone, but unfortunately, that night did not mark the end of my suffering and torment. On Christmas Eve, I waited in my car as long as I deemed necessary, till I had the courage to enter the house. It was completely black inside and I was scared. I took my flashlights I had near the door and turned them on facing the kitchen. 3 candles were lit and placed on the floor next to me. And I held Austin's BB guns in my hand. With every noise, I would pump the BB shotgun and mentally dare anything to come out. At about 11:55, I heard something start running around the outside of the house, banging on the windows and doors. I pumped the gun up, to its full power and aimed it for the kitchen. I had intentionally left the door unlocked and was prepared for whatever to come in. The back door burst open and a figure raced up the stairs into the kitchen, and I fired. The figure collapsed groaning. Only then did I realize it was Austin. He had come home from work early to surprise me and scare me. He laid on the floor groaning, cursing me as I helped him up. This time it was him, and I was so relieved. Next time, though, I knew it would be whatever attacked me the week before, and I would be ready again.